Kazakh Steppe has always attracted different scholars. At the end of the 19th century, the Russian scientist and explorer Grigory Potanin was one of them. The subject of his study was the culture of the Kazakhs. Potanin once said, "It seems to me the whole Kazakh steppe sings." Who were those singers? What were their songs about? And where did they go? What do ancient and modern pop stars and celebrities have in common? They dressed like in today's high fashion. Back then, they dressed luxury. They dressed in the most expensive and outrageous outfits. Music as an ideological tool. Жирау typified the focused personality because history is made by individuals. When did the earliest rap battles actually appear? The first Akhins were not just poets, they were improvisers. Usually when someone says they like music, it means they enjoy listening to it. For example, I enjoy ABBA. While in Kazakhstan, I realized that liking music means playing it. Kazakh people are very musical people. They play instruments all the time. They sing songs everywhere. Who were these first musicians and where did this tradition come from? I'm Daniel Bassadin, the professor of sociology from Australia, and we're searching for mystery again. This time we're going to learn about the songs and poetry of Kazakhstan. We have it easy now. A couple of taps on the touch screen and the voice of your favorite artist is in your headphones or speakers now, with the exact song that you've chosen. But how things were for the nomads who lived in the Great Steppe? Everything was simple. Each verbal work of art was passed from mouth to mouth. This knowledge was really precious, so the modern Kazakh people cherish what their ancestors had kept for them. Every nation has its own specifics. We had an audio and oral culture. It doesn't mean that we didn't do anything tangible, or let's say pictorial. You're right. In our country, this acoustic and syllabic music representation replaced a lot of figurativeness. Our expert, Kairat Janabayev, is a specialist in ancient Turkic mythology and epics. For a long time, he has been studying the problems of semantics and semiotics in Kazakh culture, and he surely knows the origins of the steppe folk art. They have been around since ancient times. They existed as intellectual intermediaries. Generally speaking, it was in the early Neolithic era. There wasn't any kind of abstract thinking. People were amazed by a flowing river. At one point, they found out that the river had spawned fish, and then they ate the fish, so the river fed them. That meant the river was their mother. This is where the mythology comes from. The people who had acquired this knowledge became the first shamans. This is how folklore was born. From the reflections of a fire in the Neolithic caves, from the shadows dancing on the stone walls, from the cries of night birds and the sounds of rivers. Folklore is an essential part of the spiritual heritage of every nation. With the rise of languages as a means of communication, storage and transmission of information, the entire layers of folk art have emerged. Songs, proverbs, sayings, and legends from time immemorial tell us stories about historical events, people, triumphs, and upheavals of the nations. Yerjan Alashtugan devoted his whole life to the art of the word, combining all the ways to spread it as a poet, a translator, and polymathic author.
Слово «акын» что в переводе на казахский, на современный казахский литературный язык означает просто поэт. Это общее название.
The word akın, translated into modern Kazakh literary language, simply means a poet. This is a common name for all the authors directly involved in poetry. There are Sals, Sarız, Kaykı, Saykı, Suley, Жыршыз, Жыраус.
Имеет свое обозначение и тонкую разницу.
Not only men were engaged in poetry, women also excelled in this art. In some regions of the Kazakh land, they even had a special name.
Кайкы и сайкы. Это присуще западному Казахстану, непосредственно полуострову.
Kaykı and Saykı. These are the words from Western Kazakhstan, and namely Mangistau Peninsula. That was the Mangistau school. This was the only poetic school with a gender difference. That is, Kaykı was a masculine, while Saykı was feminine. There you couldn't call a female poet Kaykı. In central Kazakhstan, the school of Sals and Sarız was more widespread. They had no female Sarı and Sal there. Kazakh land was once a home to a unique and vibrant type of art. Ancient Greeks and Romans came to a theater for performance. Here, theaters came to you. Sals and Sarız were the ancient form of Kazakh drama, and they had their own secrets too.
Салы серии, допустим, это представители традиционной.
Let's say Sals and Sarız were representatives of traditional Kazakh culture. They kept a secret culture, a universal culture. They composed both the music and the lyrics of the music, and performed it themselves. However, Sals and Sarız also had a subtle difference between them by class designation. Sals were representatives of the more prosperous class. Let's just say that Sals were representatives of the feudal cycle. Yeah, chosen few. But in modern language, for today's viewers, we'll put it this way. Sals and Sarız were the superstars of the 19th century. Let's say so.
Скажем так, да?
It turns out that not only modern pop stars and celebrities have a craving for luxury and grandiosity. Centuries ago, Sals and Sarız were especially fond of eccentric images and expensive outfits.
Они одевались, да, вот сейчас у кутюр как одевается, вот так же с золотой иголочки они в свое время одевались.
They dressed like today's high fashion. Back then, they dressed luxury. They dressed in the most expensive and outrageous outfits. In order to get an outfit, for example, one Sal could sell a herd of horses. They even bragged in the songs of that time, namely Akan Sarı and Birjan Sal, told that one bridle of theirs was worth 40 horses. One bridle of the Akın, or Sal, or Sarı, of that time cost that much. These steppe artists often dressed in extravagant fashion, using feathers, shiny accessories, and unusual elements. Everything that drew even more attention to their person. It certainly wasn't cheap either.
Сал обязательно выделяется. У него либо белый.
Sal had to stand out. He either had a white horse or a black horse, unlike the others, or a white camel, or something like a yellow camel. Generally, he was the king of this whole process. Sals were really bohemian. They were eccentric. They were the real aristocrats of the steppe.
Их спонсировали. Были крупные степные меценаты, которые...
Well, they were sponsored. In the steppe, there were patrons who spent large amounts of money to promote this cultural layer. They urged to appeal to the masses. By doing so, they popularized this type of art, modern bards, let's say.
Скажем так.
It's interesting that at that time, the representatives of, let's say, entertainment industry tried to stand out not only with their creativity, but already with their PR stunts. Many of them, especially Sal's comic artists, tried to come up with something special for people to talk about it long afterwards. They were looking for that special hype. Here is what Бердалы Оспан, historian and ethnographer, says about this.
Сал мог подъехать к аулу, упасть с коня.
Sal could ride up to the village and fall off his horse, so everyone would see that he fell off his horse. Then the young women had to approach, take him by his hands, put him on the carpet and carry him, He fell on purpose. Well, he didn't have to fall. He could just put his legs up to be seen. These people were eccentric, But if he was seen falling and no one came for him, he would remain in that position for several days. He would still outlast them. They would still have to do this his way. They personified the freedom itself.
Они тоже олицетворяли самосвободу.
From a modern point of view, the most well-known and famous nomadic artists even had their own riders. The villages they were going to visit were aware of this in advance and prepared for it, taking into account the preferences of the guest. They cooked the food that he liked, chose a place for him to sleep, and tried their best to please the star.
Сал и Сере – это наш казахский театр. То есть из аула, от аула к аулу едут.
Sals and Seres were our Kazakh theater. They were handsome, free, and creative people who went with a sumptuous entourage from village to village, singing and playing. There were girls and guys. Akin usually accompanied Akins, and normally Sals dressed very nicely. It was a whole theater. They dressed nicely, this big entourage rode across the steppe. There were up to 40 people.
До 40 человек было, до 40.
Naturally, such performances were a significant event for the people of the village, regardless of their age. They had a great cultural impact on communities. Every girl, especially the poor ones, dreamed of getting into the entourage of a Sal because he had money, gold, candies, all sorts of sweets and treats, and he spoiled them all. The girls walked out to meet him. Everyone sang. It was impossible to imagine them without singing. He sang, and his entourage stretched for 2 kilometers, singing songs. Generally speaking, they were the life of the party, the triumph of youth, spring, beauty, fertility, immortality. Wherever a Sal came, people there were convinced that the enemy would never attack. But keep in mind that the main value of early Kazakh artists wasn't about entertaining the masses. Thanks to their creativity, we have received knowledge about many historical events and personalities, life on the steppe, and the moral character of people of those times. I mean, it's art. They didn't just entertain and sing, like Mahambet or Temisov. They fought against the rules. Their struggle had to be theatrical, and at the same time, it had to be truthful. They just sang so on the one hand, they couldn't be punished or killed because this was just art. On the other hand, it was truthful, and they were telling the truth. That was Aesopian language. It was art, that's how they spoke. These were the Seres. The difference between them is that some went along the path of comedy, while others chose a dramatic path. Epic poems. This type of folk art exists in many cultures around the world. In Kazakh, the term jur refers to this form of poetry. We generally think of epic as something monumental, a big story that can last for hours. However, jur is different. It could be a small poem or a conversation. The main part of it is in its meaning.
Жирауи – это самые ранние представители степной поэтической культуры.
Jaraus were the earliest representatives of the steppe poetic culture. Jaraus existed even before the Kazakh statehood, during the Nogai era, during the era of the Golden Horde, during the era of the Turkic Haganats, during the era of the Huns, during the Saka period, they were also Jarau. As long as the nomadic culture existed, there was a concept of жираус. Some words were something magical. They had mysterious powers that other plain words simply couldn't convey. And it really was some kind of sorcery.
Не передать, и это действительно имеет какую-то магическую силу.
With the help of their powerful speeches, жирау had a huge influence on pivotal events in history. They could create some kind of a bridge between the authority and the people. They did it by composing new works on a certain subject or by selecting existing relevant works from their catalog for performance. Жираus, they created certain works on behalf of the state, on behalf of the Han, or let's say they're in the name of the people. That is, they were part of their nation, the blood of their people.
В период каганатов они были приравнены к святым. Они были культовыми.
During the period of the Haganats, they were equated with saints. They were iconic personalities. Therefore, those stone writings that we find to this day in the east of modern Siberia and Mongolia, such as the steles of Kultegin, Tunegok, Joldy-Tegin, Moy and Shor, were the heritage of the first жираус. Our contemporaries are more familiar with the names of жираус from the Golden Horde period.
Золотоордынского периода.
It is because of жираус that the folklore of the Turkic people became well known beyond their homelands.
Жирау, то есть это был человек-энциклопедия. Он ведь еще не один эпос наизусть знал.
Жирау was like a walking encyclopedia. He knew more than one epic by heart. That's the thing, you see? Because one epic could be about historical events, another epic was about something else. Well, it was believed that when he was speaking, people believed that the spirits were watching the жирау to make sure he told everything right.
Чтобы он правильно все сказал. И каждый жирау, когда он заканчивал,
and each жирау after his performance said that he told everything exactly the way he learned it from his predecessor. If people noticed that he made a mistake somewhere or had to put something another way, then he could be punished or even sentenced to death.
Его могли наказать вплоть до смертной казни.
The main genre for жирау was tolgao. As a rule, it bore great ideological significance. Often the author thoughts are presented in tolgao in the form of edification or teaching.
Жирау же это все очень высоко. Жирау, он как бы не принадлежит одному роду и вообще сообществу родов. Он живет
жирау was a very high rank. Жирау didn't belong to one tribe or the community of the tribes. He sort of lived in a close bond with the government, with the Hanat itself. Although he was neither a minister nor a deputy minister, he participated in affairs at the state level. He was really involved in them. Even though he didn't hold any positions in the hierarchy of power, so to speak. His job also included predicting what would happen in the future. That was understandable, since intelligent people could think a few steps or even centuries ahead. He could predict what would happen in the future.
Это понятное дело, потому что человек думающий, он на несколько шагов вперед думает, и на несколько веков даже он может знать, что в будущем будет.
One of жирау's missions was to give a speech to the army prior to a military campaign or battle. Thanks to their speeches, they succeeded in lifting the morale of the thousands of soldiers. For example, Ақтамберді жирау Сараулы, who lived in the late 17th or early 18th centuries, spent most of his life in military campaigns. His tolgaus kept the fighting spirit of the warriors and appealed to their courage.
Жирау это было олицетворение собранности личности.
Жирау typified the focused personality because history is made by individuals. People listened to him. Жирау had to have a prominent personality because it was a big responsibility. In other words, жыраус were able to express in their poems something that an ordinary peasant of the steppe would never be able to say to his Han. In this way, they served the interest of the people by opening the eyes of the leader to the real state of affairs. According to modern researchers, жыраус, these defined people, have used their talent helping the rulers of the time to make some really difficult decisions. According to our expert, the formation of the Kazakh state was connected with жыраус to some extent.
Это вот начиная от асан кайгы, сыпыра жырау, кодан жырау. Вот именно...
It started with асан кайгы, сыпыра жырау, and kodan жырау. The school of Kazakh жырау started with kodan жырау. The Kazakh statehood grew out of the tragedy when Kara Kıpçak, Kobulandı, killed Akjolbi, the son of kodan жырау. So after this strife, Kere and Jibek, two sultans, formed the Hanat, Kazakh Hanat. Жырау, as representatives of nomadic culture, were common for all modern Turkic people. The жырау school was a tradition that lasted until the end of the 19th century.
Буквально до конца 19 века.
Over time, singing and poetry ceased to be the prerogative of nobles in high places and became more common. Жыраус were replaced by akıns, who were known for their ability to improvise.
С окончанием периода жырауства начинается период акынства. И вот в этот момент...
And with the end of the era of жыраус, the era of akıns began. And from that moment, there was narrow interpretation of the word akın. From that moment on, the representatives of written literature came to the forefront. The most prominent and the greatest, of course, was Hakim Abay. But there were many predecessors, a very large number of akins who had already written down their poems.
Большое количество, было очень большое количество ахынов, которые уже писали стихи в письменном виде, да?
Works of akins were easier to understand by ear. Often, they were more entertaining. However, funny songs nearly always expressed an allegorical view of the political or social situation in the country.
Первые ахыны, они были не просто поэты, они были поэты-импровизаторы, то есть, которые...
The first akins were not just poets, they were improvisers. They participated in aitis. You know what aitis is? During aitis, poets rival each other in composing poems from the top of their heads, as well as asking and answering questions. This culture today is represented only among the Kazakh and Kyrgyz people. However, about 40 Turkic ethnicities used to have this kind of art. Today we call these improvising poets aitiskars. Not just akın, but aitiskar akın. That is a poet improviser. This school was born specifically and at the crossroads of 18th and 19th centuries.
Школа, она зародилась именно в конце 18 века, в начале 19 века.
We can say that aitis was the first creative contest in the steppe. It was kind of a forerunner of modern rap battles, which are popular in hip-hop culture. As in today's version, the participant would exchange poetic replies, often sarcastically pointing at the rival's weakness. Now, the winner was decided by the audience feedback or by the opinions of experienced poets or singers. And that's when Grigory Nikolaevich Potanin said, the whole steppe sings and everyone listens. In any yurt, there was kobыз or dombra. People couldn't live without them. If guests came, they would definitely either play or tell a story or sing. Everyone sang. Even modest Kazakh girls, they all sang. Music and songs and music were a great celebration of the Kazakh spirit and culture. Well, the Turkic spirit Turkic-speaking people such as Kumyks, Nogais, and others. Jaraus represented those people, for example, the Crimean Tatars. Well, this is the beauty that forms the people's soul and lives in it. Musicologist and collector of Kazakh folk songs, Alexander Viktorovich Zatayevich, pointed out that oral folk literature, folk and historical legends, the so-called jurs, epics and fairy tales, draw attention with the unusual images and flamboyant wording, magnificent metaphors and similes, and the scope of fantasy.
Есть еще понимание жырша. Жырша, они сами не сочиняют. Они
There's also a concept of жыршы. Жыршys didn't compose anything. They just kept a huge catalog that was created before, that was composed before them. They could learn by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of poetic lines by heart and recite them day to day, night to night. It was such a divine performance that the listeners could remain there day and night in the presence of жыршы.
Слушатель мог сутки напролет находиться там, в присутствии жыршы.
Due to the fact that there were very little written evidence, historians suspect that the authors of many works can be questioned. The same Talgaus were passed from mouth to mouth many times. No wonder that now it's almost impossible to establish authorship. Moreover, some of the works could have been stolen deliberately.
Мы не знаем имена первых создателей, но степная культура, она имеет такое свойство.
We don't know the names of the first creators, but the steppe culture is a transmitting one. It was passed from mouth to mouth. It left its legacy. The next storyteller passed a more elaborated piece of art to his disciples. Over the course of centuries, new meanings appeared. They were like diamonds. Diamonds with new facets and new shapes shine brighter and become even more beautiful. We can say that the same goes for Kazakh poetic art.
То же самое вот с казахским поэтическим искусством, можно сказать.
Now, researchers call the works of Akuns and Jaraus who lived and worked between the 15th and the 18th centuries, in the heyday of this form of art, a treasury of folk wisdom. But they also have heirs to their works to the present day.
Ну, я думаю, что и сейчас я смотрю.
But I think that even now, I see it in our times, there's still something like that. We have never lost the rudiments of this culture. People told they were Sals and Sirs. For example, Nurgizat Lindiyev, Shamshik Aldayakov, they were the ones, you know? Well, there were others too. Nurmohan Janturin, for example, Shahan Musin, they were actors. Shaken Aymanov, he was one too. He was a Sir, you know? Gabit Musrepov was a Suri, but not in the same format as it was before the 20th century. The history of the Kazakh people goes back to the depth of centuries and is rich in events. Many talented Sals, Sirs, Jaraus, and Akuns can be called chroniclers of their times. They often portrayed historical events in their works from the perspective of the eyewitness or through the eyes of ordinary people.
История и культура казахского народа.
The history and culture of the Kazakh people is a layer that is waiting for its archaeologists. Basically, I would say there are works to explore for millennia. Because of history is a millennium long, then it takes a millennium to study and reveal it. Every nation has its own musical heritage. Kazakhs are proving to have a vibrant, unique, and meaningful legacy. Who knows what other amazing discoveries await those who continue to study this culture? I'm Daniel Bessedin, and it was Searching for Mystery. I'll see you next time.